Shema Israel, Adonai Echad, Adonai Tzidkenu. Shema Israel, Shema Israel, Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu. Shema Israel, Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu. Adonai Echad, Adonai Tzidkenu, Adonai Yeshuateinu. Adonai Echad, Adonai Tzidkenu, Adonai Yeshuateinu. Shema Israel, Adonai Echad, Adonai Tzidkenu. Shema Israel, Shema Israel, Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu. Shema Israel, Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu. Adonai Echad, Adonai Tzidkenu, Adonai Yeshuateinu. Adonai Echad, Adonai Tzidkenu, Adonai Yeshuateinu. Shema Israel, Adonai Echad, Adonai Tzidkenu. Shema Israel. Shema, Shabbat Shalom. Welcome to Hebrew Perspectives. Here we are again with another Torah study, another week of Torah study. For those of you that are new, we are Hebrew Perspectives. We look at a Hebrew book. We follow Hebrew heroes. We follow a Hebrew Messiah. Hebrew, Jew, Israelite, they're all synonymous terms. We are all followers of the King. Over the crucifixion stake was placed a sign that says that he was the King of the Jews. And so that means we are following the King of the Jews, reading a Jewish book, following a Jewish hero, a Jewish Messiah. It makes sense, doesn't it? Of course it does. So what we do here, again, we are Hebrew Perspectives. We're looking at the Hebrew perspective. We are looking at Torah study. Torah is the first 5 books of the Bible. Somebody asked me just recently. They were like, "Well, what book do you read?" And I try not to laugh at that or make fun of that, but basically, many people think that Jewish people read a totally separate book. It's not. It's not a totally separate book. The Torah is the first 5 books of the Bible. Somebody asked me, and they said, "Well," and I said, and I said to the question, I said, "Do you have a Bible?" And they were like, "Yes." And I was like, "Well, that Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, that's the Torah. That's what we're reading from. That is the Word of God. That is the law of Moses." Many people have, it's this kind of a disconnect. And I realize it's because they've been programmed for so long that that's not something that's taught over many pulpits as to what the Torah is, as to what the law of Moses is, the first 5 books. But I could go on and on and on about that. But what we do here is every week we gather for Torah study. In the description of the YouTube video, you will find the weekly readings. And on our Facebook page at Hebrew Perspectives, you will find that we share the aliyah, or means to go up, what we do each day, the daily study. And also, you've noticed I kind of changed things around. I've been putting the 613 commandments, going through them in a year's time. Been doing that as kind of a separate thing, and hopefully I get more questions out of that, more response out of that, more study out of that. Hopefully, then sometimes they even fit with what the weekly portion is, but not always. But that's just kind of an interesting thing that we've been doing and kind of helping out. Because the commandments are relevant. And today, in parasha Bechukotai, we will be talking a little bit more about these things. Basically, Bechukotai means in accordance with my rules. People don't like rules, but rules are something that have to be followed. Again, there seems to be some kind of cognitive dissonance that happens when it comes to rules and bringing out facts. Even you can present people facts, and people seem to have trouble with that. Try not to confuse people with the facts, but I know that's supposed to be funny. But anyway, so before we get real deep into this, let's go ahead and let's talk. Let's do the before we get into talking about a heart of flesh. Today we'll be talking about a heart of flesh. And now let's go ahead and let's say, as we do each time, let's do the Torah blessing. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and has commanded us to engross ourselves in the words of Torah. Please, Adonai, our God, sweeten the words of Torah in our mouth and in the mouth of your people, the family of Israel. May we and our offspring and the offspring of your people, the house of Israel, all of us, know your name and study your Torah for its own sake. Blessed are you, Adonai, who teaches Torah to his people Israel. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, King of the universe, who selected us from all the peoples and gave us his Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai, giver of the Torah. And as the blessing says, may Torah study always be sweet to you. So thankful for all of you that actually join in and then also come back and watch these. Some folks from other parts of the world have to watch at different times, but that's great. Thankful that you're all joining in and making part of it. Bechukotai, in accordance with my rules. Bechukotai starts with, if you will follow my decrees and observe my commandments and perform them, then I will provide your rains in their time, and the land will give its produce, and the tree of the field will give its fruit. And it goes on and continues to give some blessings. It's another one of these. It seems sometimes that as you're reading along, as you were following along this week, you'll find that the curses seem to outweigh the blessings. And that only stands to reason that we're going to want to go toward the blessings. But why do we want to do that? Why do we want to stick with that? Well, for one, it kind of makes sense. We want blessing in our life. We want those things to happen. We want good things, and we want. And the thing is, but as we learn and as the things that we're doing, we don't want to selfishly do them for our own sake. We do the things that we do, and we do it for others. Another thing that we've been talking about on the regularly as we work our way towards Shavuot, we work our way towards Pentecost. We have been doing character refinement. We've been counting the Omer. We've been counting. It's not a countdown, it's a count up. And we're counting day 40 tonight. It's a count up to in anticipation of what we are going to receive. And then thankfully we will be studying in our character development. We are working on ourselves to help ourselves become prepared for that. And thankful for some of you still joining in. And so what we have is a lot of excitement and anticipation as the build up. It's more of a build up than a countdown. You know, it's like people count down 10, 9, 8, 7. You know, I get notifications every once in a while that from NASA, you know, talking about rocket launches and stuff like that. I know, a little bit of a nerd on that kind of stuff. I'd like to see rockets fly up in the air, you know. It's a countdown, you know, blast off, you know. I mean, we love that kind of stuff. At least I do. But the point is that it's the buildup, and that's what we get excited about. So let's start with a story. This is the story of the seeds. It's interesting about a lot of stories that when it comes to many of the stories that the Messiah told, we find variations of these stories throughout the Talmud and throughout the Mishnah and the Gemara and different rabbinical writings. I had someone tell me just recently that it was like they totally glossed over what I was trying to teach them. Basically, they were just trying to say that the Talmud is just the what do they call that? The writings of men or something like that. But the funny thing is that without it, as I explained, and then here, this is what's really good about this is that we are leading up to Shavuot, up to Pentecost, and Ruth is regularly read at that time. Ruth was a convert that married Boaz. Otherwise, she would not have been able to marry Boaz if she had not been a convert, because that would have been a Torah violation. Well, but then the other part of it is that, and we've taught this before, but for those of you that are new, is that Ruth was also a Moabitess, and God specifically said no one from Ammon or Moab would be able to join the congregation. But you will not find the solution to this, how Ruth was able to be a part of this, anywhere in the Torah. You have to go to the Talmud. And the Talmud explains how the prophet Samuel, yes, the prophet Samuel, part of the Sanhedrin, court proceedings, these things, the details that are not in the Torah, you have to find in the Talmud. Samuel says it only applies to males and does not apply to females. So Ruth legitimately was able to convert and enter into the congregation of Israel. And what comes from Ruth? King David. And who is in the line of King David? The Messiah. And so I explained to this person, I said, if you go by just Torah alone, you'd run into a dead end. And this is exactly what Doeg tried to show in the Torah, that David was not a legitimate king. But you can go back to rabbinical writings, you can go back to the Talmud, and you can see that David is legit. The Messiah is legit. So you need it. You need it. But as I was trying to explain to this person, they completely glossed over the facts. It was like they didn't want the facts. And it happens a lot with people. People have become so, and I was there. Right. I was there at one point. Well, I mean, it was a long time ago, but and I was one of those people that the Messiah just came to to set all those rabbis straight and all their extra rules. That's really not the case. Right. He actually knew all the details about those extra rules and was able to, as they call it, here we're talking about in accordance with my rules, Bechukotai. What is chuk? Well, let's read the story. I realize I chased a huge rabbit there, all because I got a little too involved in somebody's conversation. Akiva looked out his bedroom window, admiring his huge estate. There were fields, orchards, and flowers as far as the eye could see. Who will inherit all this after I am gone, he thought. Akiva considered his 3 sons. His oldest son, Shlomo, was lazy. Avishai, his second son, could not be trusted. Gidon, the youngest, learned Torah the whole day without any interest in his father's business. What shall I do? Akiva devised a plan. He called his 3 sons into his room. I have decided that I cannot divide my estate among the 3 of you, He explained. That will cause all of you to argue. Each one will think that he is entitled to more than the other. So I have come up with a plan. I have prepared a package of seeds for each of you. In 6 months, I will give my estate to the one who comes back with the most beautiful produce from your seeds. I will give big gifts to the other 2 sons. The 3 sons all returned home and planted their seeds, hoping to grow the most beautiful plant. Pardon. After 6 months, they returned to their father's home. Shlomo presented a beautiful tree sapling with colored leaves. One leaf was green, the second was orange, and the third was yellow. No one had ever seen such an unusual-looking tree. Shlomo was very proud of his work. Look at my beautiful flower, interrupted Avishai. It is yellow with purple and bright red dots on the inside. Each dot is surrounded by blue circles. I hope you are happy with it as I am. Then Gidon approached his father. He had no flower, no tree, just empty hands. I am sorry, dear father. I tried my best. I planted the seeds, I watered them, I kept them away from the wind and the cold, but nothing grew. Akiva's face became very serious. I have decided to leave my entire fortune to Gidon. But how can that be? The other brothers cried. He failed. Before I gave the seeds to each of you, Akiva explained, I put them all in a pot of boiling water. None of them could possibly have grown anything. Gidon, you were the only son who was honest with me, and because of that, everything will be yours. It's interesting how a story like this with with seeds, like I said, it kind of reminds you of some of the parables that Yeshua, that the Messiah, had brought out. And so it's, uh, but when it comes right down to it, honesty wins out in the end. That's what we're doing here. We're studying Torah and we're striving towards honesty, working our way towards Shavuot. And we're talking today about a heart of flesh. Um, as I often sometimes do, I like to share from Living Each Day from Rabbi Twersky's daily devotion. And from the prayers, it says, May it be your will, O God, to spare me today and every day from evil temptation. The Zadok, a Zadok is a righteous one. The Zadok of Sands stood at his window and called in a passerby. What will you do, he asked, if you found a purse with a large sum of money and the name of its owner was in it? What kind of question is that? The man responded. I would immediately return it. You speak foolishly, the Zadok said. He then called in another man and repeated the question, to which this man replied, A large sum of money? Why, I would keep it. You are a scoundrel, the Zadok said. The next person to whom the question was put said, Rabbi, how can I tell you now what I would do under those circumstances? I might say one thing now and act otherwise under temptation. Right now, I can only hope that if I am put to the test, God will help me to overcome temptation. Wisely spoken, said the Zadok. It is wrong to plan to do wrong, but if we become overconfident and think that we will never do wrong, we are at a greater risk. We must recognize our vulnerabilities and guard against them. What wise, sage words those truly are. We never really know what we would do in that situation if that situation came up. So, a heart of flesh. Bechukotai, in accordance with my rules. Every morning, my wife and I, we pray together. We pray a daily prayer that actually comes from the half Torah portion this week. And in that half Torah portion in Jeremiah 17 and verse 14, it says, Heal me, O Lord, then I shall be healed. Help me, then I shall be helped, for you are my praise. Oftentimes, when you look in the Hebrew of this, this translation says, Help me, and I shall be helped. In here, the Hebrew, when we look at it, when we read it, it says, Raphe ni Adonai va'e Rafe Hoshieni, Vivsha A Vivshaeya, Ki Tihi Lati Ata. Basically, that's heal me, Adonai, and let me be healed. Save me. See there, that's that Hoshie, that's save me. You'll notice that kind of has that Yeshua kind of in there. It's interesting that if you go to the land of Israel, somebody may need a salvation. We kind of throw that salvation word around quite a bit, but when we read, but if you go to Israel, someone who needs help, they might say they need a Yeshua. And that's interesting, isn't it? And that's kind of more of a modern thing that happens. But people are in distress. People need help. They need a Yeshua. They need salvation. They need to be saved. And so I thought it was interesting that in our daily prayers that we do, this half Torah portion of Jeremiah 17 came up, and I thought I would share that with you. And I thought it was really interesting that it ended up coming about at this time. So the name of this parasha, Bechukotai, means in accordance with my rules. Now, rules in the Hebrew is hukim, and that root is huk. And those are commandments that are given by God that have no reason to them. Now, as you may have looked, and you may have seen as you were reading along this week, like in later on, there is valuations given to certain things, and the valuations for men were different than they were for women. The valuations were different for older people than they were for younger people. This wasn't, I mean, in today's society, people would think, well, that's socially unacceptable. Why is this? Why is a woman less? Da da da. What the problem is we have, again, conditioned ourselves so much to be offended by things that are being said because of the way we've been taught.
Absolutely.
It's really rough, but it's hard to deal with. People have people get offended very, very easily. But basically, if you look at that, what it's talking about, it says basically God says to Moses, teach the people of Israel. This is God giving rules, giving commandments, giving ordinances, statutes, judgments, doing these things. And so it's God giving these out. Does he say exactly why? No, we don't know why. We don't know why he does this. In his infinite wisdom, we do not understand completely. We are finite beings. And so, like I said, so these commandments, there is no reason given. And a lot of times they just don't have any logical sense to them.
Right.
And there's a reason for that. Oh, so this is why we look for the secrets in Torah. That's why we look for the things that we don't. So the category of the commandments, laws, as we said, were mishpatim. We learned about those. Those are which there's human reason can dictate on its own. Then there's testimonies, eudot in the Hebrew, are testimonies. Those are, but then you have ceremonial institutions that basically, we learn to see these things, we learn to understand, and we learn to follow. And so one of the things that we specifically, when we're learning to observe the Torah's chukim, these ones that we do not understand, we are expressing our total submission to the Torah of God, to God's will. You've heard me say this before. People wonder, what is the will of God for my life? It's The Torah.
That's right.
The Torah is God's will. So we follow God's will. So when we have this readiness to follow, to go into the unknown, to boldly go where no man has gone before. No, so we follow his directives, even when doing this flies into the face of logic or reason. Now, seem to have a tickle. Now, this total submission that we have to God's will without any concern with any rationale, it seems at odds with the bulk of what's being talked about in this parasha. Because there's a lot of talk of rewards and punishments and that await us if we do not fulfill God's commandments. So if we are fulfilling God's commandments, God's will, for its own sake, rather than our own interests, remember I was talking about this is where we have to be careful. Why are we doing this? We're not doing this for our own interests. We basically, the advantages of obedience and the disadvantages of obedience, are they really relevant to what we're talking about here? So I've got the Kehot Kumash about parashat Bechukotai. It's often combined with, we know we had an extra month this year, it's often combined with Behar, and in the public reading. And so it talks about here, the Kehot Kumash talks about how the two parashot are normally read together. They basically, so that means it comes into being one parasha. And so how do they go together? What is implied? So if you have, last week was Behar, a mountain, on the mountain. And then this, it seems to be kind of an opposite of what's being talked about, the Bechukotai, basically in accordance with my rules. And so it's basically a humble submission to God's will. So the Kehot Kumash says, we have explained that true divine self-assertion is possible only when we have first overcome our inborn sense of self. The more we lose our sense of self and our awareness of God's reality, the more our divine self, our divine soul can be manifest, and the more God can act through us. In this light, not only do the names of these two parashot not clash, they are in fact articulate in the same ideal. So as we were talking about, as we are doing our midot, our character refinement, working our way toward Shavuot, this is part of the process of losing our sense of our own self and being more others-centered. And that is exactly what God is all about. That is exactly what God is all about. He's all about us. He created this for us. Now, the fundamental meaning of chok, that the root of that is this is what is interesting, is that it's talking about chok is a chiseling. You ever seen somebody chisel into a rock? They have a chisel and they have a hammer and they're chiseling, they're engraving into that rock. So chiseling or engraving. Remember when we learned not too long ago about how the commandments of God being engraved into the rock. Engraved is cherut, similar to what we're talking about here, right? It can also be, that can also mean, engraving also means cherut, and cherut. Cherut means freedom. So there's actually freedom when you allow yourself to be chiseled by God. God engraves his Torah into us, into our heart. Then that's where the freedom comes from. And people tend to have been taught, and I was taught the same way, erroneously for years, that the Torah is actually bondage. That's not the case. It's actually freedom. So this chiseling that's being talked about here is implying that through observing these types of commandments, we express our true unity with God. Just a letter engraved on a block of stone is parcel of that stone, and not a second discrete entity graded onto it, as is the case with a letter written in ink on parchment or paper. Moreover, letters are engraved in stone by removing what was there before, just as observing God's rules is predicated upon the removal or negation of the ego. So you can see what we're talking about here is we are allowing God to dig into us and remove what is not needed in order to put his Torah upon our hearts, to have it put into us. Take a heart of stone and create a heart of flesh, right? That sounds familiar, doesn't it? Ezekiel 36. Ezekiel 36 is very, very interesting. So let's look at Ezekiel 36 here real quick. So Ezekiel chapter 36 and verse 26, and I will give you a new heart and a new spirit, and I will put within you, and I will put within you, and I will take away the heart of stone out of your flesh, and I will give you a heart of flesh. People love that verse. That's a trademark verse that people just love that verse. But oftentimes what's interesting is that the next verse, sometimes people will read the next verse, but they'll stop at a certain point. And that verse 27 of Ezekiel 36 says, and I will put my spirit within you. And right there, it's like, yes, it's all this spiritualness, wonderful spiritualness that we're getting out of all of this. But it continues on, and it says, and bring it about that you will walk in my statutes, and you will keep my ordinances and do them. So yes, Baruch Hashem, praise the Lord, we will have our hearts changed. The Torah will impact our heart. He has freed us, given us the liberty to be able to do his commandments, to follow his statutes. Remember, we talked about this last week. It's not too hard. God said so. It's near to our hearts. It's in our mouth. We can do these things. We can follow these commandments. You know, again, I say things. Thing is in Hebrew is davar, which is also word. Word and thing are the same thing. And we can do it. It's action. We're following through on what we are doing. So, let's go. Let me go back before I continue on. Let me see what we're doing. Oh man, we're flying along here already. So the Kehut Kumash talks about it, says this perspective will help us to understand why a parasha named after God's supra-rational rules and the total self-abnegation called for in observing them can be concerned almost wholly with the graphic description of how worthwhile it is for us to submit to his will. When we have emptied ourselves of our ego, we view the rewards promised by the Torah not as motivating impetuses encouraging our compliance with God's will out of self-interest, but as intrinsic components of the divine experience. God is absolute goodness, so abnegating our ego in favor of becoming transparent conduits for God's will as our true divine self asserts itself enables us to experience God's goodness in its fullest, including the physical beneficence that results from obeying his will. So yes, we get blessed by doing it. But that's not why we're doing it. We are sharing others. So let me do another thing. So as we're continuing to improve ourselves, we're continuing to go on. I want to share some things again out of Rabbi Noach Weinberg's 48 Ways to Wisdom. And again, we're counting 40 tonight, but in the 39th one, I found I'm just gonna kind of go through some things here. And one of the ways that we can abnegate our ego, put ourselves aside, is when we start doing something that is called noseh ba'ol im chavero, which is sharing the burden of someone else. It means carrying your friend's burden. So let's talk a little bit about this. Let's talk a little bit more about this. So people today, and my son and I, we were talking about, my oldest son and I, we were talking about this morning, how there's just so many people that all they worry about is themselves.
Right.
It's this narcissism is running rampant. There's people that are out there, psychiatrists out there making their living talking about this, and they have thousands of people flocking to their viewership, learning about how to avoid narcissism, and yet it's still running rampant. It's just crazy. But there's people that are out there. They're struggling with heartache. They're struggling with self-doubt. They have lack of clarity in their lives. There's people that have troubled relationships. People are just go from one failure to the other. They go from one sickness to another. There's people out there that are hurting, and when people are hurting, they tend to hurt other people. And when you understand this, and you are around other people, maybe you're at work, maybe you're at the workplace, maybe you're even amongst your family, and you get hurt by one of them, or you see them hurting someone else, or you see them lashing out, it's probably because they are hurting. One thing about this is that we try to help. We're always looking for balance, okay? But we still have to maintain our humanity. We have to be human beings. And what does it mean to be a human being? Is to be more than just an animal, and override those things. And so whenever we see somebody that's physically hurt, we maybe I've been certified CPR. I can do that. Just doing staying alive. So, that's they teach you. That's the song they teach you as you're doing CPR on somebody to keep the proper rhythm. It's funny that it's staying alive. You're keeping somebody alive by doing CPR. But anyway, when something physical like that happens, people jump to the chance to help somebody that is hurting physically. But all too often, when it comes to the spiritual distress or the emotional distress that people are having in their lives, people often get ignored. That's why there are so many cries for help, and you'll see it on social media. I hate my life. I don't want to be a part of it anymore. I'm going to end my life. You see this often. People are crying out because the spirit, their ruach, their spirit is crying out. And oftentimes people are ignored. I realize a lot of times that's just a cry for attention, but still, people are suffering. So this is where what we're doing, what we're talking about sharing a burden, right. Sharing other people's burdens is that I know it's hard, but you have to enter their world.
Yes.
You have to feel that burden.
Yes.
Because why? Because a broken heart is a whole lot worse than a broken arm. All right.
Yes.
So Rabbi Weinberg, he talks about putting yourself in somebody's place.
Right.
Walk a mile in somebody else's shoes.
Right.
The Messiah talks about some of these things, about these little details, these little laws that we talk about. If someone sues you for your coat, give them your cloak also. That's sharing in somebody else. Why were they suing somebody in the first place? People sue because they're hurt. And we live in a sue happy world. Lawyers are making a ton. This is
Yes.
why the Talmud teaches that we are supposed to be judges, not lawyers.
Yes. Amen.
All right.
Baruch Hashem.
All right. So think about it. Take note of somebody else. Is this person, are they happy or are they sad? Whether they're happy or sad, you can share in either one of those things.
That's true.
Are they anxious or are they confident? You try to enter their world and you try to pay attention to what they are feeling, what they are carrying with them. You ask yourself, what is their burden?
Right.
We don't know. I mean, you can use your imagination and you can try to feel of what that weight is what's weighing them down. This is why the Messiah, when he talks about taking on his yoke, that his burden is light. That's the Torah. That's the freedom of the Torah is not heavy. It's light. The teachings are light. He's talking about the Torah there. He's not talking about anything else. He's talking about the teachings of Torah. Now, so put yourself in the other person's shoes. Has this person, maybe they lost a parent in their life? Are they an elderly person? How, maybe, how about, have you ever kind of felt the empathy of someone, it's their first day on the job?
Right. True. Talk about it.
I train a lot of people. And I try to make sure that I am empathizing and realizing that what they are going through.
Right.
They are getting a lot of information. And so in the beginning of when I first trained somebody in my occupation, I focus on two things. Watch my methods and learn just a first part of the equipment. That's all just two things. Let's just watch what I'm doing and learn just one aspect of something that we're going to be using. And that's so that's so that it's not so much on them. It doesn't become so overwhelming. So, how about, just somebody moving into a new neighborhood? Yeah, that's not always easy.
Yeah, that's true.
How about the cashier at the supermarket? Oh my goodness, my wife has done that. She worked at Wegmans. The dealing with the different kinds of people, and it's amazing to me. I remember one time I was a cashier one time a long time ago when I was working in an enlisted mess at the Yorktown Naval Weapons Station, and there was something that always bugged me, and I always and whenever I would deal with a cashier, I realize I'm doing a little side note, but this is really helpful, okay? And just shows you how you're dealing with people's emotions. But anyway, people would give me my change. They would put like the dollar bills in my hand, and then they would stick the coins on top of the paper on the bills. And then like, well, what do I do with this? So you've just purchased something, so maybe you've got a plate of food in your hand, or something, and you're like, now what do I do? I'm going to walk around with the what do I do? And so there was a thing that I had learned is like I would hold the cash in one hand, I would hand them the change so they could put that in their pocket, and then hand them the bills so they could put them in their wallet. Well, I had a guy that I was going to do this, and he reached over and he snatched the bills from my hand because I was handing them change. And then he accused me of going to take the cash and pocket it and steal it. And that's not what was going to happen. I remained silent in the face of derision. That's part of a daily prayer. That was kind of part of the way I was anyway. This was a long time ago before I was still a very young 18-year-old guy, man, still learning. But that was, you never know what's going on through, but you just understand it's one of those things to deal with. But
right.
So, but feeling people's pain, it's not always easy. Um, you know, even if you don't know what to do to resolve somebody else's pain, at least feeling that pain is something that can help you. Rabbi Weinberg, he talks about, he says, that's why we're not supposed to initiate conversation when performing the mitzvah of Nechum Avelim. That is called visiting a mourner during Shiva. Shiva is the 7-day period of which Jewish people mourn. The greatest act that you can do is just go and sit quietly with that person, sharing that mourner's pain.
Yes.
It makes their burden a little bit lighter.
Yes, it does.
It helps them to know that somebody is feeling with them.
True.
The same principle applies with, and what we were talking about is interesting how Jeremiah 17 came up. We got heal us and we shall be healed. We're praying for someone else, right?
Right.
Well, let's look at something here real quick. So the prayer, where did I do this here at? In the prayer that we pray for others in healing, oh boy, where did I, pardon me as I just
On your notes.
look this up here real quick. I had it and then I must have did something else with it. But the prayer that we pray, it talks about, you're basically you're praying for the sick. It's not about you. It's about helping them, and that's the whole heal us and we shall be healed, save us and we shall be saved. But there's also a mitzvah that's called Bechur Cholim. Bechur Cholim is visiting the sick. That's another thing that we do is you when you go in to visit a sick person, you're doing that. Just your visit going there lifts the spirit of the person that is ill.
Right.
And it can help them actually to feel a little bit better and speed them along, even physically and mentally, in helping in their recovery. So just by spending some time, just by showing your concern, you've lightened the burden. Again, there's that lighten the burden. When we do this, we provide real help. Now, Rabbi Weinberg says your kindness certainly does not need to stop there. If you can also provide tangible assistance, such as making dinner for them or babysitting their kids, by all means do so. But the first step is to empathize and feel their pain. Here's another thing that we need to remember, that we were once in that position.
True. Yeah.
All right. We've been through that same, we might have been through that same difficulty or something else that somehow that, we can empathize, even if it's something similar. I mean, remember the times that you've struggled? Some of you have never had struggles. So you angelic beings just love you. But for those of us that have struggled, maybe we struggled financially. Maybe we struggled when we had to go get a new job. Maybe we encountered difficulty raising teenagers. We can empathize with somebody else because we've been there ourselves. We can relate with others because we've done that. We've experienced that challenge in our life. And that is when we need to offer. Sometimes people are, there's people that offer advice when they've never had children, or offer advice when they've never been married. Those are a little bit tougher. But a lot of times we can tend to have a knee-jerk reaction to some of these things, and we end up shutting ourselves out. But we're shutting others out, but we need to help those that are experiencing those challenges, sharing what we have gone through. Now, oftentimes, the reminder may be a little too painful sometimes, but we still because we don't want to relive that experience, but we still need to overcome that natural aversion to not wanting to help somebody. We still need to reach out and get involved. Now, Rabbi Weinberg talks about this, and he says, this is why the Torah commands us, you shall love the convert, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. Deuteronomy 10:19. Because we were slaves in Egypt and felt that pain, we have a greater obligation to be sensitive to the plight of others. We've been there. The experience is part of our collective national memory. Even though a convert is now a Jew and is included in the mitzvah to love our fellow Jew, the Torah gives us an additional obligation to love him, which requires us to overcome our resistance to revisiting the pain we once felt. Again, this is why it's so important. This is why the convert is mentioned 36 times alone in the Torah, because it's that important. Now, let's talk about something that's really important here, and that's family first.
That's it. Yes.
All right? The people that we love the most, our family, and yes, even our close friends. There are some, everyone has a close friend that has been like, they've been like family, okay? So these are the ones that we are to empathize with the most.
Yes.
Ironically, oftentimes, these are sometimes the people that are often taken for granted. We tend to overlook their feelings. As a parent, you may, they're your teenagers, it's hard to empathize, especially if your teenage years were terrible, but it's like, moody teenagers, you don't want to get involved. Then again, there's also you come home from work and you just want to plop down and just melt away from the troubles of your day. What would happen? How much better would it be if you actually came in the door and asked how your spouse, your wife or your husband, if you asked them how their day was and let them unload instead of just, hey, what's for dinner? Which I do this often. Even before I get home, what's for dinner? I'm sending a text. But we love our children. We love our family. We just want people, we want our children to obey us. But how much more would they do what we would like them to do if we empathized with what it is that they are going through? They're not just machines. And we're input information into them like computers, and we want them to spit out connect with the copier and spit out a piece of paper, and here's your diploma on how to raise kids. But Rabbi Weinberg, he talks about here. He says, as children ourselves, we need to empathize with our parents and strive to understand what is worrying them. How would you feel if your child was behaving the way you are? What's bothering mom and dad? They love me and they're anxious, thinking that I'm making bad choices and I'm going to waste my life. So, if you find yourself arguing with others and wondering how on earth they can possibly think this way, try to see the world from their perspective. Again, like I was saying, I was not really arguing, was trying to present something with somebody and giving them the facts, and they were just, I'm trying to think, well, you know what? I was there too at one point. Somebody was trying to present the facts to me, and I was like, that can't be. We've done it. Wisdom is all about having an open heart. Wisdom is like an open hand ready to receive. That's how we receive wisdom. But oftentimes we don't do that because we're stuck with where we are. So instead of being so quick to impose your own opinion, inquire about theirs. Listen. Take the time to enter their world and understand how they think. Seeing things from another's perspective will, at the very least, reduce your anger and increase your empathy. It will also enable you to more effectively respond to their argument. Now, we're running out of time here, but one of the things I just wanted to kind of speed things along here. Remember what I said? It's like not only can we share in other people's pain, but share in people's joy.
Yes,
It is a requirement in Judaism to share in the joy of bride and groom.
There you go.
To be happy for people.
Right.
Sometimes people struggle with this. Why can't I be happy?
Yeah.
Again, it's all about putting ourselves aside, and it's about others. One of the things that we can do is that we can reach out, and I'm going to try to finish up with this. When we reach out, a great example of this is Moses was raised in the palace of Pharaoh.
Right.
He had everything.
Yes.
He had it all. But it says in Exodus 2:11, it says, Moshe grew up and went out to his brethren and saw their burdens. Rashi comments and says, he directed his eyes and his heart to be distressed over them. Moses made a decision to feel the pain of his fellow Jews. He could have easily ignored their suffering, but instead he directed his eyes and his heart to overcoming the natural tendency toward callousness.
Right.
Feeling the reality of their anguish, he knew he had to take responsibility and act. Oh no, there's that responsibility word. Rabbi Weinberg, he says, empathy pierces our cocoon of self-absorption and apathy and compels us to take the action the situation demands. When we do not feel someone else's pain, we put our heads in the ground and ignore their plight. This is why so many good people around the world are passive in the face of enormous tragedy and judgment. Do not be inured to someone else's pain. When you hear news of a terror attack in Israel, take it to heart. Feel for the victims and their families. Otherwise, you will become callous. When you open yourself up to feeling other people's pain, you are far more likely to be moved to do something about it. Now, here's where we're going to finish this. Feel God's pain. Our empathy needs to go beyond. We need to feel God's pain as well. God suffers when man suffers.
Yeah, that's it.
Our Almighty God in heaven, he suffers. So our children, when they make mistakes, we can't take the pain away from that. We can't coerce our children into obedience.
Right.
It doesn't work that way. They're going to make mistakes. We feel the pain. God looks down and he sees us. He sees his children. He sees us. We are these independent, responsible people, trying to take responsibility, and we feel that pain. He feels that pain. It must certainly hurt him as much as we see it when we see it in our children.
Yeah.
Rabbi Weinberg talks about our Father in heaven also suffers when we make mistakes. He is witnessing millions of his children losing their way, drifting from their heritage. He sees rampant divorce, unhappiness, abuse, confusion, and abandonment of their walk with God. He says here, Rabbi Weinberg says, feel the Za'ar HaShekhinah, the Almighty's immeasurable pain, and use it to motivate yourself to take responsibility for bringing back his people and spreading the light of Torah, which the world so desperately needs. I'm going to go to the Talmud here. Some people don't like it, but it's so helpful. The Talmud teaches that each and every one of us must say, Bashevli nivra ha'olam. The world was created for me. That comes from the Sanhedrin 37a. What is this talking about? We are God's caretakers. We are responsible for the entire world. That's a heavy responsibility. I realize that. But when we embrace that responsibility, it begins by when we relate to other human beings as real people.
Yeah.
If we open our heart to the reality of their pain, and then we take action and we do something about their suffering, we become like God created us to be, in the image of God, helping other people.
Yeah.
May God bless you and keep you. May God shine his countenance upon you and be gracious to you. May God turn his countenance toward you and grant you shalom. Shema Israel, Adonai Echad, Adonai Tzidkenu. Shema Israel, Shema Israel. Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu. Shema Israel, Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu.